That breaking news is coming to us this morning from Hernando County. Deputies busting thieves who they say hit a series of stores across the state of Florida, stealing $16 million worth of jewelry. Let's take you to that announcement live.
Authorities discovered that with every jewelry store heist, thieves had also knocked over a nearby grocery store, making as much as $30,000 in cash. Many of the techniques used were unfamiliar to authorities.
A lot of times you see smash and grab stuff where people just go in, smash a window, smash the display case, take what they can, and get out of there while the alarm is ringing. This group went to great extents to circumvent the alarm, and those sophisticated safe cracking methods were used.
They even planted false clues to lead police astray.
They would bring hair from wigs or from actual people other than themselves, and they drop the hairs around, hoping that the police would, get those hairs and then have the DNA of somebody else.
Okay, this case happened, as it said, in the late 1990s. The three individuals were arrested and ended up going to federal prison. And the case was pretty much all but forgotten. We start out with these three suspects. As I said, they were arrested in 1999 and went to prison. They got between 5 years, on the high end, 5 years and 11 months. On the low end, 18 months. So none of them spent more than 6 years in prison, and two of the three spent actually about 2 years or less in prison. And of course, this all happened outside the state of Florida, and many of the agents here certainly were not working law enforcement at that time. So from 2008 is when the last suspect was released from jail. In 2011, the state of Florida started seeing some of these burglaries. Again, they did not know that they were necessarily done by these expert burglars. Lakeland, Port Charlotte, Gainesville, and Ocala all had burglaries that were similar in nature. Now that we look back, were similar in nature to these cases. Of course, they had not impacted Hernando County yet. We had no idea this was going on. We didn't know about the ones in the 1990s, nor did we know about these four burglaries in Central and a little bit north central Florida and South Florida. Then we had four more burglaries in 2013 and 2014 in Ocala, Palm Harbor, Lakeland, and Punta Gorda. So Lakeland and Ocala had been hit twice in this period of time. Again, no impact to Hernando County as of yet, and this is 2014. Then we actually see a case happen in Hernando County. There were 10 burglaries total from the beginning of 2015 through the end of 2016. And those 10 burglaries, right in the middle of them, Spring Hill was hit. It was New York jewelry. And the safe was in a very similar manner, and I'll show you some pictures in a moment. The safe was broken into, and a significant amount of jewelry was stolen. Now, as I believe it was an FBI agent said in that mastermind video from that TV show, we don't see this very often. And so our initial reaction was that it may actually have been an inside job, and maybe some of the holes that were drilled were actually done to just throw us off, that somebody actually knew the combination of the safe, opened it up, knew they'd be a suspect, so drilled some holes just to throw us off to make it think it was a safe cracker. Of course, now we know it actually was a safe cracker who did the case. And in these cases, what they would do is they would go in through an adjacent business, typically. They would disable the alarm. Mr. Granums is the one who would disable the alarm. He would also monitor police frequencies, particularly frequencies that were unencrypted, to make sure that there were no patrol cars in the area and that law enforcement was not responding. They would use a heavy-duty drill, some of the equipment we have up here, and of course they'd ransack the business or anything of value and take that. And those were all the stores that were not Kay Jewelers, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So then, again, we thought it was kind of an inside job. We didn't know about all these other burglaries. And then we actually got a bulletin from Sarasota County Sheriff's Office for the Nokomis burglary, and we started putting two and two together and said, wait a minute, maybe there's more to this. And of course, law enforcement started talking to each other. Bulletins were sent throughout the state, and we started realizing that this was actually a pattern that was developing. And so after that point, March of 2017 through the end of 2017, there were 5 more burglaries two of which occurred again in Hernando County. One of them was Dan Lowe Jewelers, and the last one, I believe, was K Jewelers. In the K Jewelers, there was something different, so at first we weren't really sure that it was even related. We thought it was kind of unusual that we had experts, but they would actually cut into the safe. They would not drill into the safe like your typical safe cracker would do, and we couldn't figure out why till later on in the investigation. We actually determined that the individual, Mr. Ornelas, is actually contracted with K Jewelers to open their safes when they're not able to open them. And so he was concerned that if they saw a safe drilled using the same methods he used, that they might put two and two together and actually figure out it was him. So when they broke into a K Jewelers, and I guess they broke into a total of two of them, one here and one in Titusville, that's right, the Titusville case. They used a little different. They would actually cut into the side of the safe and go in through the side rather than trying to open it with drill holes and doing the tumblers. Here's a list of all the stores that were broken into in Florida during that time. There were 23 total. We believe there was about 16 to 18 million dollars worth of items stolen. And really through good police work, great relationships with our federal partners, and knowing the FBI agents, particularly knowing that we were serious about this case. We had 3 burglaries by this time, and that we certainly wanted to get them solved. An FBI agent happened to actually go in to a thrift store in South Florida. It was owned and operated by Mr. Petroselli. It was called the Secret Attic Thrift Store. And the FBI agent saw some jewelry that he thought might be related to this case. And that kind of started the ball rolling and allowed us to work with the FBI. They seized some of the jewelry. We traveled, some of my detectives traveled to the West Palm Beach office of the FBI, photographed the recovered jewelry, and actually were able to make some identifications that it did actually belong to at least a couple of our burglaries, Dan Lowe and K Jewelers. Interestingly enough, the Dan Lowe recovered items, one of the ones in particular, the one there that's highlighted on the screen, was apparently a pendant that was made for the owner's wife, and it's very unique. So it was 100% identified, so we were sure we were on the right track. West Palm Beach then, FBI agents from that field office and the Hernando County Sheriff's Office actually traveled to Chicago. They got information that they were going to go to Chicago and do another jewelry store burglary in Chicago, and maybe even extend to doing marijuana shops, because there's a lot of money in there as well. And they were actually taken down in the act with a couple of my detectives as well as FBI in Chicago. They were getting ready to break into a Cy Fredericks Jewelers, and the information is on your screen, and we can get you more specifics if you want it. I'm trying to hit the highlights here, but they were actually taken into custody in Chicago, and they were arrested and prosecuted for that particular one because it did have an interstate nexus. Now, all the jewelry store robberies, or burglaries rather, in Hernando County, as well as Citrus, and of course the other ones in the state, we talked with the state attorney's office, and we have a great relationship with them. They certainly are eager to prosecute these cases, and they elected to file charges, several charges, including RICO on these individuals. And you may have heard the term before, but it's not one that's used very often. RICO charges are kind of difficult to prove. They're kind of difficult to prosecute, but our local state attorney believes that we have all the elements necessary to move forward on that. So these should be some fairly significant prison sentences that these individuals should get. So again, our first individual is Ornelas. He is the safecracker, for lack of a better term, the mastermind of the group. It's my understanding, the rumor is that he's one of the top 5 safecrackers in the world.
Yes, sir.
So he's very well known, both as a legal safecracker and, of course, now as an illegal safecracker. And you can see the charges there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we do have some pretty significant charges that Brad King and his people are going to be charging this individual with. The next person is William Granums. He was kind of the surveillance guy. Actually, the original 3 that were arrested, Mr. Petroselli was not part of those original 3 in the 1990s. One of the original individuals has since died. He was a former police officer, and he was kind of their surveillance specialist back in the 1990s. Mr. Petroselli took over to go, he kind of was a runner to go get tools and so forth, and Mr. Granums took over the surveillance and actually listening to police radios and so forth. And so he's also charged with RICO, 4 counts of burglary to a structure damage greater than $1,000 and all the other things. And you can see the criminal history there as well. And last and certainly not least is Mr. Petroselli. He's one of the individuals from South Florida who owned the thrift store that the FBI found some of the jewelry in and kind of cracked the case open. He's also charged with RICO and 4 counts of burglary here in Hernando and Citrus County. These are all the agencies that were impacted. We've been in contact with them. They're going to be able to close out their cases and put these to rest and let the owners of those businesses know that this was solved. It obviously took a little longer than law enforcement wanted it to take, but we certainly have got it solved now, and the individuals here in Hernando County, I think we even have one of the owners from Dan Lowe Jewelers is here. Thank you for coming. And I'll answer some questions now, or I'll let my detectives answer some questions if anybody has any questions about the investigation or the takedown, or here are some of the tools they used. I didn't go into a lot of detail. These were, most of this, if not all of this, including the cash and the jewelry and so forth, was actually seized in Chicago when they were taken down in Chicago, and you can see that there's some very high-tech equipment there. I'm told that that laptop has the diagrams of every safe ever made and how to get in them. Again, Mr. Ornelas was an expert in that, and he actually brought that with him so he could make sure he could get into any of the safes. So, any other questions or comments or concerns?
The inventories, businesses that was locked up, when the thing went down, will we ever have the opportunity to look at the inventories?
Yeah, we're going to try to get, eventually try to get any of the recovered items back to the rightful owners.
Now, I have a tape of what you call a stick for a computer. When our inventory is luck would have it, the man that shoots our commercials, it just shot all the showcases with the inventory.
Okay, good. Well, we'll work with you on that and see if we can get any of your items back to you. Absolutely. Any questions from our media partners?
This sounds like such a large sum, up to $18 million that could have been stolen. Do you have any idea of where this spree kind of ranks, either in Tampa Bay or in the state, as far as jewelry heists go?
Well, I don't know if I don't think we've heard of anything. You could see of course it was several decades ago, but they were $10 million when they did the 50 back then. So the 50 burglaries, or close to 50 burglaries back in the 1990s. So I would have to say for especially this type of operation, it's got to be up there near the top, if not one of the largest in the state of Florida, especially related to burglaries and jewelry store burglaries, because it was a tremendous amount of money over a long period of time, and as most of us know, jewelry can be very expensive very quickly. So, who else had a question? Oh, yes, ma'am.
When they were arrested in Chicago, had they done any other burglaries outside of the state of Florida, or was that their first foray?
I think that's other than the original burglaries they did in the Southeast back in the 1990s. I don't think we have any evidence that they did any. I can let either Detective Galarza or Detective Peterson, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Actually, no, ma'am. There was no more. The last burglary that they had was K Jeweler, and they kind of knew that we were on to them at that point. And at that point, they decided to go out of the state, and we were able to apprehend them when they went to do their next one.
How did they know? How did they get tipped off that
Because of the interaction with the FBI and Mr. Petroselli in South Florida, originally it wasn't known that he was involved, and it later determined that it was.
So that's when we were, the FBI was in South Florida, took some of the jewelry into custody, and they thought he might have either been an unwilling or a willing, for lack of a better term, fence, to get rid of the jewelry. Then we come to find out later through the investigation. Like I said, everything in hindsight's very clear. At the time when you're going through it, it's not so clear. And so they actually see some of the jewelry from him, thinking he was an innocent victim, or he would save his own skin, not knowing that he was right in the middle of it the whole time. So.
Did you get to look into their lifestyle? Were they living the lifestyle of a millionaire? Or were they kind of keeping low? Because that's a lot of money in a couple of rounds.
So if you look at the $18 million or somewhere in that figure, that's retail value. We come to find out that there was some intricacies before that were financed for these burglaries, and when they would go fence them, like anything illegal, there's a lot of work that has to go into covering up what they're taking. So we found out that they were getting a percentage on the dollar for the piece of jewelry that they were fencing. Obviously, the fence is going to do what he has to do. We learned that they use more sophisticated techniques to tear down the gems and the diamonds, and then they would roll those over.
You will notice there is at least one. We were looking at it when we were taking out some of the evidence, and we believe it was taken from the individuals at the time they were arrested in Chicago. But there's one watch there that looks, if it's real, and of course we have every reason to believe it may be, is worth a considerable amount of money. You may want to get some video of that. It's a very beautiful watch, a little bit flashy for my taste, but I'm sure some people would like it. So,
Is there a broader ring than these three guys?
There is not. These guys worked just together. They focused on, when we later found out that they would scout out up to 200 different jewelry stores, and they only selected the 23. And there were different reasons for each jewelry store that they may have deferred to another one, whether it was law enforcement technique, patrol technique, or they just didn't feel comfortable. They could be in the middle of an operation and completely abandon the operation because they got hanked up for one reason or another. So there was about 200 that they scouted out, and they only selected these 23.
And as our sheriff was mentioning a minute ago, it was so sophisticated that when, it was so sophisticated that, when they would originally break into the stores, the mastermind, or Nellis, he would be the one that was cracking the safes. And if he felt at all that anything was hairy or that law enforcement might have been coming, he would call the operation. They'd pull back, they'd wait and watch, and then they would come back and continue. But it took hours to get into the safes. So.
Were they living in South Florida, or because these are all over the state? Where were they living?
They were. I think they were basically stationed in South Florida. But one of the reasons we found out later that they were in Hernando County 3 times. They had some relatives. I think it was Ornelas that had relatives, or Granham's had relatives actually in the area, so that's why they hit businesses in our area 3 of the 23 times.
Okay, so right now you are listening to the Hernando County Sheriff. He's breaking down some pretty sophisticated jewelry store burglaries. They just announced that they arrested 3 people in connection to these burglaries. They were actually arrested up in Chicago, and now we're just kind of waiting to hear exactly what their punishment will be. These 3 men, the sheriff said, took in between $16 and $18 million worth of jewelry, 23 locations across the state of Florida from 2011 to 2017. We'll keep you updated on this story throughout the day right here on ABC Action News, streaming now.